Tech by Tips.
Welcome to another Tech by Tips video. In today's video, we're going to address a video request, and the request said, I'll check it out. In the meantime, thanks for your videos, and it would be cool if you do an audio bookshelf next. So Repo is asking us for a video on how to set up audio bookshelf. So this is a great option here because we already have Reader, and Reader allows you to get, for example, audiobooks. And you might also download podcasts, and this application is perfect for that. So let's go ahead and address this. GitHub repository for audio bookshelf, and that's available in ADV player /audio bookshelf. And if we can see here, it's an application that has 148 contributors, so it's a good amount of people, mainly written in JavaScript and Vue. And if we look here, it says that it's a self-hosted audiobook and podcast server. And it has its documentation, user guides, and support, and everything is very well written. And basically it tells us that Audio Bookshelf is a self-hosted audiobook and podcast server. So it is fully open source, and they're working on an Android and iOS app also that is currently in beta. So you can connect to it using your cell phone, which makes it easier for you to just consume that content from that server with your mobile device. And that's great. And then it says that it can stream all the audio formats on the fly, so that's perfect. And it says that it can search and add podcasts to download episodes with auto download. So that's even better because it not only allows you to play any content that you have in your machine. In this case, we're doing it with a Synology NAS, but wherever you were storing that. But it also allows you to search and download things, so that's even better. So it becomes like an R for downloading podcasts. And then it says it has multi-user support, and you can set custom permissions for the different users, and it keeps progress for every user and syncs across devices. So if you're using the mobile app, it's going to be up to date with what last you did, and it detects library updates. There's no need to rescan. It uploads books and podcasts with an utility that you have where you can drag and drop things. And it can back up your metadata, do automated daily backups. It has a progressive web app, so that's even better. You don't really need to install an application in your phone. It can actually just be a progressive web app. So it's basically like a web link, but it behaves like an application. And it has a bunch of other stuff here. Pretty nice. It also has the option to send content to e-readers. So it's really good. So far, I mean, everything that I see here is pretty nice. The user interface is pretty nice, as you can see here. It looks a little bit like Plex. You know, it has the thing at the bottom where you can play and stop and all of that. And I mean, so far it looks good. And yeah, and then they have details here about how do you set everything up. If you need to expose it, they give you some details on how to do it. They, if I believe correctly, even went to the point of, Synology. So if you're using Synology, they give you how to do it. In my video, I'm not gonna do it because I don't have my Synology NAS exposed to the public internet. But if you need to do that later, here's how you do it. You basically have to expose port 80 or 443 from your router to your NAS. So do a port forward there, and then all the requests will go directly into your NAS. And then once you set this up, it's gonna redirect the subdomain to whatever container you're running. So that's good. I mean, the GitHub is pretty useful, but they have a documentation site. So if you click here, it takes you to audiobookshelf.org, and here we have a bunch of details of how to do things. So here we're gonna go into the Docker Compose because now we're using the latest version of the Synology NAS, which allows us to use Docker Compose to deploy things instead of have to manually go into the user interface and doing things. So we're going to rely on this, and we're going to make some changes to this code, and then we're going to be deploying the application. So first we need to see something here. It says that we need some volumes, and those volumes are going to be where we store audiobooks, where we store podcasts. So this should be 2 folders that need to be created in the NAS to store our content. And then we have our config folder, which we usually put in the config folders in the NAS. And then something for metadata to store the metadata for the stuff that we have here. That's good. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. So let's go and create those 2 folders, the audiobooks and podcasts. So I'm going to go into my NAS, and I'm going to go into the file station, and in here I'm going to go into the media where we have the folders for all the media that we store. And I'm going to create 2 folders, one for podcasts, and make it uppercase like everything else, and for audio books. So now we have 2 extra folders where we're going to store our content here, podcasts and audiobooks. So that's great. But then we need to go into the Docker one, because we need to say that we're going to create a new config location here for audio bookshelf. Let's make this something like that. And here we go. Now we have audio bookshelf, and it said in the documentation that we need to store config and metadata. So I'm going to put the metadata next to the config. You can put it in another folder here if you want, but to me it makes more sense to put it there. So what I'm going to do is inside audio bookshelf, I'm going to create 2 folders. One is going to be config, and the other one is going to be metadata. And now we have those 2 folders there. So now that we have that, then we should be okay to start using this information for a Docker Compose file and create our project. So remember, we also had like a folder here for projects. So let's also create a folder here for audio bookshelf. And that's where we're going to store that Docker Compose file once we create it. So now we have all the folders that we need. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Container Manager. Let's organize this a little better. All right. Then let's go into the projects, create a new project. Then I'm going to say audio bookshelf. And I'm going to say that I'm going to store that here in the projects, audio bookshelf. And it says that I'm going to create a Docker Compose, and I'm going to just paste all of that in there. I'm going to change this to New York, which is my time zone. And then we're going to see what else we're going to change in here. So they're using the Google container registry. I don't like that, so I'm just going to switch that to the Docker Hub one, which is ADV player and then audio bookshelf. And then let's check that they have the latest tag also. So we're going to go into Docker Hub, audio bookshelf and ADV player, and look at the tags, and there is the latest. So good, that is looking fine. And then it says that it's going to map port 13378 to port 80, but I don't want it to use port 80. I'm going to give it some other port. Oh, the name has to be lowercase, and I keep making that mistake. So audio bookshelf, there you go. Next, and I'm not going to start a project for now. I'm just going to leave it there, and let's go into the details, then YAML. And here are all the changes that I'm going to apply. So I'm going to go over them real quickly. So I want to give a name to the container that gets created instead of having Docker Compose randomly give it a name. So I'm going to say container underscore name is audio bookshelf. And then the image, I said that I was going to use the Docker Hub image, so I changed the URL to that. And then in here, this is important for the ports. The container is going to be listed on port 80 for connections, but I want it to be exposed on port 8077 because we've already used a bunch of the ports from 8080 up. So I'm going to go down a little bit, 8077. And then here's the important part. The folders that we created, they're going to be mapped to the /audiobooks, /podcast, /config, and /metadata inside the container. We're going to put a path here from our NAS. But this path, to get it, the best way to do this is we go into the file station, we look for the folder that we want to put, and we go into properties. And then we're going to see the path here. We copy that, and that's what we put in here for each one of them. So in my case, my volume in my NAS is volume 1, so it's lowercase volume 1 after a slash. And then comes the path inside my volume. So HTTPC media audiobooks, HTTPC media podcast for the actual contents of the audiobooks and the podcasts. And then for the Docker configuration information, it's in the volume 1. And then Docker, it's lowercase in my case. And then inside that, we have configs, and then audio bookshelf. And then we have the config and the metadata there. So that's what we need to put there. Also, I've already changed my time zone to America, New York, but we need to also add the user ID and the group ID for the administrator user that has permission to actually write and read from these folders that we put up here. So once we have all of these changes, we can save that, and then we can go back into the project and either right click and say build or action and build, and that's going to start pulling that image extracting those layers and then building the container. In my case, I had already downloaded that image, so you're not going to see that. It's going to straight up go into building that container. So I'm going to go right click build, and you'll see that it says container creating with the name that I specified, audio bookshelf. And it's going to take a few seconds, and then it's going to say it created it and it is starting. And if we get a message at the end saying exit code, and then the code for that is 0, then that means that everything went well and the container is running and it was created. If we get something else other than 0, then that's an error. The container usually doesn't start, and then we have to figure out what we did wrong. So in this case, I'm waiting for that message to come through. Here we go, exit code 0, and then we should see a notification here that the project was completed, built. So then we can clear that, we can close here, we go into the containers and we see audio bookshelf is right here. And if we go into the logs, we'll see that it's setting itself up. It's using a database that looks to be like a file because it says SQLite, so that's definitely a file database. And it says starting server, refresh just to make sure. Okay, I don't see any changes. So let's go now into the IP of the NAS on port 8077 and see what we get. And here we go. We get the audio bookshelf setup page. And in this page, then we have to create our administrator user basically. So I'm going to name it audio bookshelf, for example. And then I'm going to say that my password is password. This is for the sake of the video. And then we say that the config is /config because that's exactly where we put it. And metadata is /metadata. And that's correct because that's where we put it. So now we can say submit. And then it's going to set up our server. And perfect. I can save that if I want. Actually, let's just save it. Why not? And then here we can log in. So now that we saved it, we can log in with this. And here we go. We got our user interface for audio bookshelf. We're running the latest version, which is 2.11.0 in Docker, and that's perfect. We here on the right side have our user information. We see that it's a root account with the name that we gave it. We can select the language and change the password if we want. We don't want to do that, so we go back into settings. In settings, we have the things that we can change in here. For example, there's options to store the cover with the item, so we can turn that on. Store metadata with the item. I'm not going to do that because we already have a folder for metadata, so I'm going to leave that like that. Ignore prefix when sorting. That's irrelevant right now. Chromecast support. That's irrelevant right now. And then here, the display homepage. Use bookshelf view. So if we do that, then we'll have that nice little bookshelf that we saw in the screenshots in the repository. And here it has the library use bookshelf view. We can also turn that on to see that bookshelf. And in here we select how we want the time to be displayed and the format of the time. So we can say 12-hour AM PM or 24-hour. And if you need to find covers, you can turn this on. If there are subtitles that you need to parse, you can also turn that on. And then this tells you where do you want to pull those covers from. There's a lot of options. For now, I'm just going to leave it at Google Books. And yeah, that looks good enough. It should have saved all my changes because as you saw, it was saving stuff while I was making changes. So now we can go into the home. There's no libraries. That makes sense. So let's go back into the settings. And let's work with this with other configurations. In the libraries, obviously we need to add our libraries. In my case, I didn't have any books or podcasts in my library, so it's going to be showing us empty. But here we have books, and then the library name is going to be audio books. And then you can change the icon to whatever you want. So let's say we want something like this. It's like a book with headphones, so that kind of makes sense. Metadata provider, we're going to leave it at Google Books. And then we look for the folder. We said that that was going to be in the /audiobooks. So that's where our books are going to be. We select that, and that's good. Now we can create this, and now we have our first library. All right, and if we need to make changes to that, we can go here into the 3 dots and do that. And this is for sorting the order later once we have other libraries. So once again, let's go back into the edit and see what we have here. This enable this setting will ignore ebook files unless they are inside an audiobook folder. So that kind of makes sense to turn it on. Skip matching books that already have ASIN or ISBN. Hide single book series. Okay, all of this I'm going to leave turned off for now. Let's save again. I'm not sure if I can just skip tabs and then save. So that's why I was doing that. And here in the scanner, it has information on the priority of things to scan for. I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to leave it like it is. Schedule, here you can set a schedule for automatic library scans. I would recommend that. If you have another application storing files there, or you're dropping them yourself, you want it to automatically search for files there. So you can say an interval here, for example, every hour, every 12 hours, and stuff like that, every day. So let's say every day, and then at midnight. That sounds right. In the advanced options, you can do a cron expression if you want. I'm not going to do that. And then let's try to see. All right, so it keeps the changes. So I just have to continue and then save. Okay, I don't need to remove any metadata, so that's fine. I'm just going to save it like it is. And we have our first library here. That is audiobooks. Let's create another one for podcasts, and let's name it podcasts. And we're going to pick an icon of headphones. And let's use iTunes because it's the only option that we have right now. And look for the podcasts folder, select it, and in the settings, I'm not going to change anything, and then we're going to say scan it every day, and that looks correct. And nice create, so that should save all the changes that I made. And now we have two libraries, but currently our libraries have nothing. So if I go back here, I have my user interface, but I don't have anything. Now let's go back again to the settings and see what else we have. We can create users here, so you can add users so other people can log into the application and have their own record of where they are in the use of the application. For example, let's say I'm listening to the Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows 1 audiobook. So if I logged in as myself, it's going to keep track of where I stopped, right? So each user should have their own account, so it can track properly where each person is in their books and podcasts. So that's important. This is where you create your users. And then listening sessions, you can see if there's anything currently active. There's no listening sessions, so we don't see anything. Backups, here's where you can do backups. And you can see that the backups are located in the metadata folder, so that's perfect. And for the logs here, we can see all the logs for the system if you need to. Notifications, you can probably use some kind of system to notify you about changes. Email, that's where you put your email settings to have the application send you emails if necessary. So for example, you can use your own SMTP server if you have one, or you can just put here your Google or your live.com SMTP. That will probably rely on the port 587. And then you put your username, password, and all that, and then it'll be able to send you messages. And here's other utilities. This is not really I'm going to go over in the video, but you can find details about your library and statistics about yourself as a user. And if you go here, you can see your stats, and you can upload. Remember that the thing said you can upload content to here. So if you go into the upload here, then you can say, okay, I want to upload a podcast or an audiobook, and then the folder is going to adjust obviously based on what you pick. So we only have specified 2, and then you can specify what file you want to upload. So you can click here to say choose files or choose a folder, and it gives you all the options that you can upload here into the server that it's going to be able to handle. And if you click here auto fetch metadata, once you upload that file, it's going to pull that metadata from the provider that you specified in your configuration. And so this part is good. The library currently has nothing, so I'm gonna get some files and I'm gonna drop them into audiobook shelf so that we can see something at least in here and how it works. Actually, this is a good example. Now if we go into the add section over here, remember that the application said that it can pull our podcasts for ourselves. So let's do something here. Let's search for Coast to Coast AM. And here we go. It actually found that there's a podcast by Coast to Coast AM and by George Norrie. So we can actually select it here and say, I want to listen to these podcasts, and then it should be able to pull it down itself. So here you go. So it says the author, and then here's the URL of the content. So it knows where to pull that information from, the genres, and we can mark it if we think it's explicit content or not, and then what kind of episode it is. It tells us it's a series or episodic, the language, and nice. So it pulls all of this information. We specify here if we want to change the folder, but this is a podcast, so it's going to be in the podcast. So then we can say auto download those episodes for me, and then we submit this, and then the application is going to add this podcast to our library of podcasts that we want, and then it will eventually look for those files and download them for us and store them in that NAS in the folder that we specified. So you see here, it says that we already have one file, and that is the cover for that podcast. So that's the image that we see here probably. And then eventually it'll search for those files. If it finds anything, it'll then download. So it has an option here for download. So this gives you an option to download a zip file with all the contents of this podcast if you want. So that's really nice. Yeah, it finds all that information. And right now I don't have anything, unfortunately. It hasn't found anything, but you can add your podcasts in here. So now let me go out and get something and put it into the server and see how it works. Alright, I was clicking around in here and I noticed something interesting here. So if we go in here and we click on files, then there's an option here that says episodes. And I noticed that if I put this to 0, because it says with 0 you look for unlimited episodes, and then if I say some date in the past, because honestly this is an old show, so let's say like 2000 or something like that, January 1st, and then we say from this date on I want to look for episodes, and then if I come here and say check and download new episodes, then it's going to look for episodes after this date to download and put into the server. It looks like this is how you download directly from inside the app. You would have the latest date here, and then it will pull the newest episode if you do that. Oh right, I have added some content here as an example to see if it worked, and it immediately started recognizing the files, but we can always go in here. You see it's scanning, but we can always go here into the libraries and say scan the audiobooks and scan the podcasts, and then it'll find out what we have in that directory, and then eventually we should get the full list of all the things that we have in our server. So let's just give it time. It's scanning right now the podcasts, and it looks like it completed. So if we go back to the home, then we have here the things that it found that we had. Wondering if we can filter somehow between podcasts and audiobooks, because right now I'm not seeing the podcast. I'm only seeing the books, which is the Harry Potter example, and that's read by Stephen Fry. Let's try that.
Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone.
Alright, so it did read the contents, and we can listen to the audiobook, and it works perfectly. I don't see the podcast. Oh, maybe I need to change here. That's why. If we go into the podcast section, then we see that podcast that I was looking for. And this is very nice because I uploaded episode 11 of the Coast to Coast AM, the best of Coast to Coast AM here, and it found it, but it also, as you can see, has downloaded things on its own, because I did not upload the other episode 198. So that's something that it found on its own. And then here we can do a sample here by playing here.
That once you pick up a refreshingly cold drink,
and it is playing, so everything's working properly. So yes, this is Audio Bookshelf. I hope you find this video to be useful, and if you like the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. Remember that I rely entirely on your support. I'm not monetizing this channel, so if you like the content and you want to support me to continue to creating good quality content for you, feel free to donate with the links in the description below, one for PayPal or using the Bitcoin address if you want to. and also share the videos to people that you think might find it useful. So that's going to be it for this one. This is another video request completed. I'll see you in the next one.